Welcome to the Paranormal Archives. In our first season, we've partnered with the Thanet Paranormal Association to share stories from their members. First up is Sean, the founder of the association. He'll begin telling us a little bit about how he formed the group, and then go on to tell us about his experiences of an entity in his house.
My name's Sean. I run Thanet Paranormal Association, which is a paranormal group based in Thanet in Kent. I was originally brought up as Catholic, but that was more on my dad's side. And then when I moved in with my mum when I was quite a young teenager, my mum was a practicing witch and pagan. So there's been certain things throughout my life that I've noticed that I had a bit of an ability with, which one of them being automatic writing, which I used to do a lot when I was younger. I started doing it again recently. Even though my mum introduced me to paganism, it is my general beliefs, but I'm not what you would really call a practicing pagan. I just sort of use that as my guide, if you will. I do have quite a hectic lifestyle, like kids and this and that, so I would ideally like to practice it more. My eldest, she is going through sort of deciding what she believes in herself, and at the moment she is more towards Christianity. She knows what I do, she's interested in what I do, but I want her to make that decision herself. I'm not going to sort of say to her, you need to believe in this. She'll believe in what she wants to believe. For me, obviously, the activity that happened in my old house, that's what led me to change over and change my whole mindset. She hasn't experienced that, and, maybe she will, maybe she won't. And I'm happy for her regardless. Same as all my other kids. I have got, I believe, 3 pentagrams tattooed on me. That one, I got one on my foot and one at the top of my arm. But the pentagram at the top of my arm has got all the sort of symbolism around it, whereas these are more just sort of generic pentagrams. There is a misconception that pentagram is for Satanism, but it's really not. It's more of like the elements. It's one of them things, if you don't know much about spiritual and all that, it's easy to say, it's Satanism, but it's not. The cross, an upside down cross on my face, to me, that's your eyes see good and bad. When I say you got the good and you got the evil. So from a young age, being around that kind of thing, it really sort of, especially seeing how it all unfolded and, how sort of little things happening, and it piqued an interest. For quite a few years, things calmed down spiritually with me and my mum. My mum still collected the crystals, done tarot cards, stuff like that. And there'd be sometimes mum would go like, "Oh, do you fancy coming around mine? We'll do some Ouija board." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." I mean, because that was something that's quite nostalgic for us. There's always going to be people that go, you shouldn't use Ouija boards, but we always done our protections. We knew what we was doing. We carried on like that for a few years. But then one day, I just sort of said to my mum, I was like, I really want to sort of get active with it again. And then between us, we said, well, let's set up a group. So which I did, even down to the logo, the stuff like that. That was something that me and my mum decided was a cool, minimalistic but effective design. Everything that I'd done setting it up was all run by my mum. My mum sadly passed away in 2022, but then because my mum was the head of the sort of spiritual side in my family, it kind of gave me a kick up the bum to get it really going. We have, whether it be residential or commercial property owners that come to us that feel that their property or business may be haunted, we go around there and we investigate for them. The group is a good place for the people that want to talk to somebody, that might be able to shed some light on a situation that they're facing. We all come together so that it's a safe space for people to feel that they can chat with others that are on the same wavelength as they are, or if there's stories that they are afraid of, talking to just anybody about. We're there to lend an ear and help where we can, and it's good for other people to know that there's others that are going through something similar to what they are. I always try and be an active member of admin, or respond to pretty much everything on there, and be a really active presence. Again, we've highlighted that there's anonymous posting allowed on there, because not everybody wants to put their name out there, and because they feel silly almost about their stories and stuff, when really we're there to show that they shouldn't. Because, what might be sound silly to somebody will be really something truthful to somebody else, because they might be going through something similar. So this said house was a 2-bedroom council house. Primarily, I can remember the activity that we got, but previous to that, I would say the house didn't really have a feeling of sort of any activity in there. I would say it was quite just calm. I definitely think it was due to me and my mum doing spiritual activity in that house that sort of welcomed in said spirit. And then from there, we was doing pretty much different aspects of spiritual each night, whether that be things such as table tipping, even little things like, giving a knock on the wall. If someone's there, can you knock back for us? Just little things, but just to keep the energy going. And we done it every night. So table tipping is where you, at least a couple of yous, sit around a table that is, for one, sturdy, but also quite lightweight. You only do it with people that you trust, that are not going to manipulate the table or anything at all, so you need to have complete trust in each other. You either put your fingers lightly underneath or on top. Most people put them on top, and it's mainly just your fingertips. You do that and you're asking spirit to manipulate that table, to move that table. For us, when we've been doing it, we've had the table lift off the floor when our hands have been on top. A lot of rocking backwards and forwards. It moves so much that the table sort of goes around the room. The problem is, but I suppose it's the same with anything spiritual, there's a lot of speculation that it's all faked and stuff like that, but if you're in that moment yourself and you're around people that you trust that are not going to manipulate it themselves, then it's all good. After about 6 months of us doing this, I was sat at one end of the table, my mum was sat at the other end, and there was 2 vacant chairs either side. One night we said, look, we're not afraid, can you come and show us that you're here with us? And the chairs started rocking backwards and forwards. Now, for us, because that was what ultimately we wanted, we was pumped, we was excited. With that, it seemed like the activity only got stronger and stronger. Things would happen all throughout the day, of the night, to the point that lights would go on and off on command, footsteps up the stairs, the chairs would slide across the room on their own, loads of stuff. It was always the same spirit that we made contact with in the house. We got to the bottom of a lot of things with that, so we found out how the man passed. Later on found out that he was buried in the graveyard at the end of our road, and we felt that he was a friendly spirit. He didn't mean us no harm. He just passed too young and felt that he could use a form of contact through us. We was, again, more of a safe space with him. But unfortunately, he passed a few bits up the road from where we lived, and later on we found out that he was buried at the end of our road. Even when activity was happening, it always felt light-hearted. It didn't feel intimidating, didn't feel menacing or anything like that. You didn't get that sense of, if you was in the house on your own, like you're being watched and you feel like shaky or nervous. None of that. His name was Alex. I think he was in his either early or mid-30s. Like I said, where he passed a few minutes up the road from where we lived, and he was buried in the graveyard at the end of our road, we never knew he was buried in that graveyard. When I set up my paranormal group and I posted about the story of this house, obviously I could mention there his second name as well, so people knew who I was talking about. I had quite a lot of response to people saying, oh, I knew him personally, I know his family, and they was actually very curious, asking what sort of things he used to do, what he was asking us. I think we was the middleman if you will, because we was the sort of spiritual family, and used us as an avenue to be able to pass over messages that he wanted to pass over. The things that he used to ask us was stuff like to put on certain songs, for my mum to blow her cigarette smoke in a certain direction. It was things like that. So when there's asking, like, what songs did he ask you to put on? And we'll tell him, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that was his favourite songs. If I remember correctly, it was stuff like Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., I think. Stuff like that, like old school hip hop. We never knew him before this. We never knew who he was. Also, the guy that worked for the council actually buried him in the graveyard at the end of our road. And he said that he knew the family very well as well, and his dad. And I believe they're buried together, the dad and Alex. And he actually sent me a picture of Alex. So it was kind of nice to finally put a face to the activity that we was getting in that house. I had to go up to hospital for a checkup. I was talking to this nurse, and something was telling me, mentioned about your paranormal group. So I mentioned about it, and she was, oh, that's interesting, you know, and what's the sort of scariest thing you've come across? And I told her about what I'm telling you guys now about my old house. I told her the name, and she was shocked. She was like, that was my dad's best friend. So something told me to mention about the group, and then she had strong connections with Alex as well. He was more, I think, appreciative of the fact that we was there to listen to him, give him a voice if he needed it. If he wanted familiar things like the tunes that he liked, the smell of smoke and stuff like that was clearly something that he wanted. We were just there to sort of help aid that. But I think in a natural sort of chain of events, the amount of people that I've spoken to since coming out of that property over the years that have said that they knew him, I think we've passed on messages in our own way over time. I think it's brought comfort to a lot of other people as well, knowing that he came through and that he's happy. We actually had two spirits in that house. It was Alex, and there was another guy called Nathan. Yeah, Nathan actually told us that he passed by drowning. And the funny thing is, or not funny, but the weird thing is, a lot of the time we used to have just random dripping go throughout our house. We had people come out and check the pipes, there was no leaks, nothing like that, but we'd just find puddles of water on the floor. It was almost like he sort of aided Alex as well. Like it was like them two was mates. They didn't mean no harm, they just liked to often showed us that they was around. If I remember correctly, my mum was saying something about that Nathan told her before via the Ouija board that he had actually followed my mum, whether that be like a spirit guide almost, I don't know, but she didn't know him, but he was always there. Mainly started off table tipping, then we got onto the Ouija boards. We received quite a lot of direct messages that way, and then where the activity got so strong because of that activity with the Ouija and table tipping that we built up over time, that's when activity had happened at all times throughout the day. We used to have neighbours coming in from, on our road that would come in, and they were shocked about what they're seeing because they would just come into our house and they'd see chairs sliding across the room. It's a nice sort of turn of events, and it's a very fond memory in my life that was a very, very big turning point for me, I think. I was speaking to one of my old mates a few weeks ago that said what was going on with that house. People still remember it. There's one that I remember fondly, which was my mate that I just mentioned that said what was going on with that house. It was his mum. When she came in, she walked straight out into the kitchen and she see a chair sliding across the room. And I'll never forget the look of shock on her face. She didn't really say much, to be fair, but she wasn't a big talker anyway. But I think it was definitely something that more stuck with her son, like my mate at the time. When you've experienced something that strong, and it's such a big turning point in your life, and because for me personally, it's anything that's ever shown me proof, you're always chasing that. Like you want that level of activity back, but that's probably the same for a lot of other people as well. My old house, the activity that we had there, if you had outsiders witness it, there wouldn't be a way you could debunk it, in my opinion. But I am not blinded to the fact that pretty much a lot of paranormal equipment that you can use, things like K2 meters, REM pods, trigger balls, that they can be, especially for skeptics, can say, you know, that could have been that could have been that could have been that. So I still keep quite a skeptical mind, but I do believe that you have to be there in the moment. Like if you get a bit of equipment that goes off and you have a medium that's there with you and all that, and even your own feelings, you know, if a bit of equipment goes off and you do feel cold there, your hairs stand up, or, you know, you get that feeling, you can't beat the feeling of actually being there in the moment. But to other people witnessing it, they can go, yeah, but that could be that, it could be that, it could be that. I know what it's like trying to chase that level of activity that you know, that you might have experienced before. You always are searching for that again. And I think it almost can become a bit of a disappointment in a way if you don't get that level of activity anywhere else, but it doesn't stop you searching for it. You know, I hold out hopes that there will be a time where we come across that level of activity again.